Light from Lantern presents Knit a Spell. I'm Magical Maker Katie Rempe.
And I'm the Maker of Magic, James Devine.
Join us as we stitch together the symbiotic relationship between crafting
and the craft.
Welcome back to our next episode of Knit a Spell. Hey Jim, guess what? Today we have a guest.
Oh, our first guest, and it's only our 4th episode. I think we're doing pretty well.
Actually, I think this might be our 5th episode. Can you even believe it?
I've lost track. I can't believe I made such a terrible error. What will we ever do?
Well, your replacement won't make that same mistake. No, I'm just kidding.
Ouch.
That's right. Well, without any further ado,
Who is our
allow
guest?
me to introduce Amanda Mannas, who I personally know from working back in the day at Skacel. She hosted many a crochet-along events, which I had the honor of helping her with. And she even taught me how to crochet in the long run, which I feel like is a huge feat. Amanda also has her own brand of knitting and crochet design patterns, which you can find at mandobugcrafts.com. And she also has an amazing line of blended fibers that she uses your pet's fibers along with other fibers to create yarn out of your pet's fibers. And it's called woolly fur.
Hold on.
Yes.
Let's
First welcome in Amanda. Yes.
Welcome, Amanda.
Woo!
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Oh, it's a wonderful first guest. Couldn't have asked for anyone better.
Thank you.
So, totally been waiting to talk about this because when we first were talking about like having an episode on fibers, having an what is the connection between magic, metaphysics, and crafting and making and fiber arts in particular. And of course I thought about all of the materials people could use. And then Katie said, there's people who I thought about could we use human hair? That'd be kind of spooky and weird and super magical potentially. Or my kitty cat, can Muffy become, a muff? Right.
And muff.
And then Katie's like, well, actually, yes. And so I'm thrilled that you're here. Oh my gosh, it's so fun.
Yes. I would love to know. Yeah, I think you're going to ask this too.
Yeah,
how you
please.
got into this, how you got into making in general, of course, but then specifically how you ended up even coming up with this great idea.
I mean, definitely the idea's been around for a while, so it's not an original idea to me, but I'd been spinning for a couple of years, and when I decided to get into the dog fur area, it happened to be through a friend of mine. She is teaches in the area, local agility classes, and now she's into herding classes, and so she knows a lot of people that have several breeds of dogs that they really care about, and they're always looking for ways to keep momentums of their pets. And so that's kind of how I got started into it. A friend of hers had a border collie and was like, I heard that you can make yarn out of dog fur. And so I took it and started doing it that way. But actually, before I started, I was in contact with another woman already doing it. So she had a listing on Etsy and she was spinning 100% dog fur. And so I reached out to her when the border collie gal came to me, and I was like, hey, this is something someone's interested in. I'm interested in playing around with it. What does that look like for you? And how do I even go about this? So she kind of mentored me through the process. Her name is Simply Homespun. I think she still has listings on Etsy. And so immediately I realized that I didn't want to do 100% dog fur. It's kind of a finer, softer fiber, and a lot of breeds have shorter staple lengths. So that's that length of their fur that comes off their body. And it is along the lines of something like Angora, where it's really hot. So, and it tends to be a little bit weaker, right? You don't usually see 100% Angora yarns either because it's too hot and it's a little fragile. So I started blending most of my orders, actually all of my orders, with at least wool. And that kind of started back when I started processing sheep fleece raw. So I got a drum carder to process the raw fleece. And so that's kind of how I started blending the wool with the dog fur. And the the yarn that results is so much better than 100% in my opinion. And my customers have been super happy with it because it's more wearable if that's what they want to do with it. But most people that contact me for an order are looking for at least a momentum. Not all of them wear it, most of them do, but they just want something to remember their pets by. I'd say at least half of the pets are no longer with us. So they have that to bring them comfort, sometimes actually physically, right? Because you put that scarf or hat on, it's like remembering that hug, right?
Yes.
So,
oh, wow.
yeah.
That's very powerful. Okay, and thus the name woolly fur, because it's wool and fur. Okay,
Yes.
very good.
And
Wow.
what a beautiful memento to have for your pet. Like, and I love how that is one of the things about when you're cuddling with your pup or with your kitten is they're warm. They're these other little amazing companions that generate heat, sometimes too much if you're in the bed with that one pet that you had that was always like, get off me, right?
Yep.
And so for sure, that is such a cool analogy, like a scarf or a hat or something that has beloved pet fur in it is amazing. And I love hearing about some of the technology behind it, like figuring out the length of the fiber. I mean, I'm just new to all of this, so thinking about like, oh right, fiber length and the strength of the fiber, and whether it like is itchy or it's like, whether it blends, and all that kind of stuff is fascinating to me. What a cool thing.
Gosh, are you only doing wool blends? Have you gone out into any other types of fibers to blend in with the pet fur at all?
So a lot of the customers that come to me aren't really sure of the technical side, right? They are not really sure like what goes into spinning a yarn and what makes a final product something that's usable. So they usually leave that up to me, and I start with the recommendation of, 50% wool, 50% dog fur. Depending on the breed, we can adjust to what we want our end product to be. So that's mostly where I'm at. But I did make bats for a friend who wanted to spin her own pet's fur, and she's a fiber artist. So she came at me with, hey, I've got these mohair locks, and I've got this Angora, and I got some, this sparkly Angelina. I want to glitz it up. And so you can be really creative if you kind of have a foundation knowledge. It can be really fun. And I know, like, right off the bat, like, just thinking about dog fur in a yarn is disgusting to some people, honestly, right? Because I mean, dogs shed all over your house where you don't want it to be, and you're like, gross, I don't want this. But you don't think that when you pet your pet, right?
Absolutely.
You're not like, ooh, gross, you are so gross.
What happens to hair and fur when it comes off the body? I don't know. That's, I think, when the change happens. But you're totally right.
If it's attached to the animal, then it's wonderful.
Fine.
And where we bury our face in it.
Yes.
But the minute it becomes a dust buffalo that is collected under the couch, it's somehow gross. But
when you pull your face off of the cat and it's on you still, that's unacceptable suddenly.
But that's such a great distinction, because actually that is still like a fiber is a fiber, right?
Yeah.
I mean, has anyone ever seen raw goat like shorn goat? That is the fur. That's the opposite of clean. Or
it ain't cute.
Lanolin does not have the most wonderful odor either.
No. I think it comes down to like your expectation and control of the fiber, right? When you find it, when you don't expect it, you're like, is this even clean? I don't want this on me. But having that control, having it spun in, you can clean it at the end and it no longer smells, and you expect it to be there. So it's not as bad as you might expect, but also you're purposefully taking the best, right? So you're not just getting what was left over on the ground, you're going for those undercoats, those softer furs. And so it can be as high of a quality as you're looking for. So there's some out there. If you look up the term Chingora, is where you'll see some of the 100% dog furs that are kind of along the lines of like Angora. I'm doing an order now that's using an Alaskan Malamute, and you'll see that spun 100% by itself a lot because it is so soft and fluffy. If you look up these dogs, they're like white poof balls. And I honestly could spin this fur by itself. It is so similar to wool that I wouldn't need to blend it if I didn't want to, but I still recommended it to this customer. But yeah, there's a lot that it's not as disgusting as it seems, although the spinning part can be, because if you don't get that fur clean, I mean, I've come across some pretty nasty things.
So you're pretty
the
much
secrets
smelling
come
like
out.
Like
you're smelling like wet dog.
Oh yes, wet dog. And like, especially if I get hair that's been shaved, it's better to get it groomed and brushed off. But if you get it shaved, sometimes they'll nick like a cut, you know, and like you get little scabbies. That's probably the worst. So it's not all clean, but in the end, it can be really clean and luxurious.
Oh man.
And I mean, it's really what it is to the maker, though, because that's another thing that's interesting. It's not a cheap thing to have your dog's fur turned into yarn. Because I am hand spinning it, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of technique and effort, but if the customer didn't buy that yarn, it is meaningless to everybody else.
That is exactly the whole thing here. Yes, it's the making part of it, the intent behind it, the meaning of the fur you used. Like, it may not be meaningful to someone else, like you said, but it's priceless to the person who had the meaning to it. Again, just like making a hand knit sweater versus buying one.
Yeah, it's huge. That's amazing. And it is so worth it. It's worth every penny. I mean, everyone takes I'm sorry, not everyone. There's a lot of people who will take their dog for like life-saving treatments that are super expensive. And it's not about the expense. It's about the love. It's about how much you care for your animal, right? And for your companion. A lot of times they're, and for a lot of us who practice, more the metaphysical realm or witchy realm, we look at them as our spiritual companion, as our as someone that, like, there's a certain wisdom when you look into certain dog's eyes or cat's eyes. They look at you kind of like there's a human in there looking back. Have you ever known some dogs that are like that? So when you have a pet, really, it's beyond a pet. When you have a spiritual companion in the form of a dog or a cat or whatever it is, there's something priceless about that, right? So I think it's amazing. Let me ask you this. So for everyone listening, and they're like, oh my gosh, I want Rover to, like, I definitely want that. Like, I have this big fluffy dog and their fur would be amazing. Should they start brushing and collecting the fur now? And what would be your advice for someone who has a beloved pet and already knows, like, I want something made out of that pet?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the best way to go about it, is to brush and collect the softest, finest fibers. Most pets, most dogs is what I'm mostly working with, although it could be cats as well. They'll have two coats. They'll have a soft undercoat and an outer coat that's kind of straighter and more coarse hairs. If those get into the mix, when you spin that fiber, they stick straight out and they are the most prickliest fibers. I've had some people be concerned that I blend with wool, like, oh, wool's a prickly fiber. And I'm like, oh, no. I use very soft merino with these blends. More often than not, the scratchiness factor comes from those guard hairs from the collection. So I've spun dogs that have been shaved and underbrushed, and the best fiber that I've produced has been from people who take that underbrush coat and they slowly collect that fur. And it's a time-consuming, dedicated thing, but it absolutely is worth it, and you'll have something that you're really excited about.
Yeah,
amazing.
The whole thing is time and dedication. Again, it goes back to the theory that something that is joyful is something that takes time to get to whatever the end product is. It takes time to collect the fur and then have it spun and then or cleaned and brushed and then spun. There's a lot of steps in between even that, let alone then the knitting of the item in the end.
Absolutely. Oh, and one
so
other
magical
thing, it's best to keep it in a paper bag because it is a natural fiber. Certain breeds can felt. So if you keep it in plastic and it gets hot and it gets agitated, it will mat to itself in there, and then it's no longer spinnable.
So good
paper
advice.
bag is the best way to go.
Yeah, in a dry, cool place probably also, if possible.
Yeah, if
Can't
possible.
hurt. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so it's almost like, well, okay, so I had two thoughts. One regarding the pets. Like when you look into the eyes, Jim, and you see that look, you know, they're called a familiar. Is it called a familiar because they look familiar? Like, is that too literal? You're like, oh, maybe do I recognize you? Or something like that. Am I taking this totally out of context?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't really look up the etymology of that word familiar as a magical tool, but familiars are in folklore thought to be um it's more that they are familiar to me, like I am
Mm.
actually becoming a cat. Like it's kind of like
Mm.
the vampire that can become the bat and fly around and then become the vampire again. The bat would be their familiar, or I would extend my sight or my vision or my magical
Oh,
presence through the roaming of my black cat that would, roam around the neighborhood and check up on, Farmer Ted and, the
I
other people,
gotcha.
all the people, right? My familiar would go out and manage some of that. And so that's, I think, the
Mm.
origin of some of that sort of folklore.
Yeah.
Today, in modern witchcraft or modern practice, we often have animals around us, and our animals have a metaphysical correspondence, right? So you see dogs representing a lot. I mean, if you look up the magical or metaphysical correspondence of dog or metaphysical correspondence of cat,
Mm.
or of rabbit, there are so many different meanings that you could make it mean anything. But we know what they are because they're so connected to us, right?
Mm.
Dogs, there's ideas that dogs might have been the first domesticated, companion or working animal with humans, right? This sort of, like, a dog is a man's best friend or a human's best
Yeah.
friend. This idea that dogs were domesticated really early from wolves, you feed a wolf, and just over many thousands of years. So we have these animals are highly successful in the realm of, they're not going extinct. There's plenty of them. And it's because they've allied themselves with humans, right?
Mm.
And so you see
Smart.
these themes of loyalty. You see themes around the dog of protection,
Mm.
of fair warning, of companionship, right? All of them, of love, unconditional love, right?
Yeah.
So these are things that you can weave. Let's say that you have a big Malamute, right? And he's a young, healthy Malamute, and kind of a big dog, definitely need brushed all the time. You'll
Mm.
have tons of fiber.
More than
I
you
mean,
need.
you could knit something for someone who needs protection or who could use companionship, even though it's your own, your own dog. You could do that and have it as a gift for someone. What a precious gift, right?
Absolutely,
Um,
especially if that
So
person knows the dog, right? Oh.
I have a
right.
story about that. Yeah, one of my
Tell us.
customers, yeah, her neighbor has a golden doodle that she used to walk for him,
Mm.
and he got cancer and
Oh.
he lost his hair, and she sent me in the pet's fur, and I spun it into yarn, and she knit him a hat once he had lost all his hair.
Oh
Right?
my God.
So definitely it's out there.
And
Oh,
so we
that's so
could
beautiful.
see, I know, but what a cool thing to have a hat as a sign of love, protection, guardianship, right?
Mm.
And what's also cool is knitting a cap. Obviously, that would cover someone as they lost their hair for during treatment, but that's also our crown chakra. It's also our connection with the divine. And if I think about anyone who has a pet, if you want to see unconditional love, innocence in the form, in the way that is a creature completely connected with their higher self and the divine, you only need to look, at a pet. You only need to
Mm.
look into the eyes of your cat or dog or other pet. It's why sometimes we get more angry over the abuse of a pet than we do over the abuse of another human. And I think it's
Yeah.
because we see the animal as an innocent,
Mm.
as sort of representative of the Fool card in the tarot, right? And
Yeah.
in fact, that's the card with an animal in it, with the dog, right?
That's
So
right.
in the Rider-Waite-Smith iconography, we have the Fool taking these steps haphazardly into the future, relying on his holding of that white feather, which symbolizes the divine, about to walk off a cliff with nothing but his, like, immediate belongings and a bindle stiff over his shoulder. and the little dog barking like, hey, don't step off the cliff, right?
Yep.
The dog is white, indicating divine presence and divine sort of, warning, protective,
Good. Yep.
right? So there's
Innocent,
all
yep.
this loyalty. So you have this amazing sort of like symbolism and archetype of a dog. And I think that that's really, really powerful when we think about using the dog's fur, which again is its code, it's its protection, it's how it shows up, it's how we interact. Pets are called pets because we pet them. Right?
Quite literally, yes.
We pet their fur, right? If you pet me, I'm going to get a little annoyed pretty quickly. But if you pet a dog, right?
Right. They're your best friend forever.
They freaking love it, right? Usually. So I love that this is, and I think we could do the same for cats, right? If we have this beautiful, Persian cat and, long fur and it's just gorgeous, right? What amazing. Amanda, would you be open to spinning cat fur?
I personally would be open, but I am booked.
I
am booked.
Let's just say you had an opening in 3 years, which is how long it'll take me to collect my cat's fur.
But yeah, absolutely. I mean, as long as it's something that's long enough to adhere to another fiber that can bring it into yarn form and keep it there, then yeah, I mean, I don't see why not.
Yeah. So the metaphysical correspondences of a cat are what we know about cats: independent,
Mysterious.
intelligent, mysterious, the occult, the unseen. They're often connected with the spirit realm. Cats will sometimes be staring at the wall and you're like, what the hell are you? And then they're like, oh, nothing. I was just talking to a spirit. And you're like, my cat does weird. Like they always do that. And you ever notice like the dog will be sleeping in the bed, like happy, whatever, but your cat will be walking on your keyboard. Like, what you doing? What's happening with their little face up against your microphone?
No, yeah, that's exactly. Nailed it. Yes, we have a cat that does that, stare at the wall. And you're like, why though? But why though? And always the same spot, which is not disconcerting at all. So
is that where the blotch is going to start to form in the image?
Supposedly that's where like a 3-year-old girl spirit might hang out. So I don't know, maybe they're best friends. Either way, I haven't seen her, so she's cool.
Yeah. So that magic, bringing that magic and mysticism in by using, there's a long history of using because cats will lose their whiskers or the outer of their claws. They're scratching your couch. You'll find a little, stop that. You'll find a little like claw, or you'll find a cat whisker every so often. Those are often incorporated into protective spells. We can put that into a jar. We can amp up a lot of magical work. So a lot of spell work can really use the power of a cat or the archetype of a cat. Dogs, they don't lose their nails that way, right? They don't slough off. You got to clip them or sand them off. And you don't often find dog whisker. Every so often you can, but a little like bit of that outer hair of dog hair, you can use that in a spell, wrap it around a candle or something. So there's lots of uses for, your dog or cat that are already established in magical practice. So I love that this is another way to do that in a way that is so like comfy and awesome.
Yeah.
And so bummed that you're booked because,
I know. After this, everyone's going to be banging at your door.
Yeah.
Well, the good thing is I'm putting a video out on how to do it. So if they can't book with me, they can hopefully talk to somebody else that they know that spins and be like, hey, here's this video.
There you go.
Would you
Maybe
like to
they'll pick
try?
it up themselves. You never know.
Yeah, that too.
Oh, wonderful. Gosh, that's very kind of you. Always good to pass the information along. Yep. So let's talk about some other fibers. So we talked about how wool can be included in your blends. Since, every animal has their own sort of property and magical elements and this and that, we thought maybe we would talk about some other fibers. So like wool, obviously, is traditionally used, but like alpaca is also really popular, within the crafting industry in general. Do you spin with a lot of alpaca? Just generally, have you had a lot of experience with alpaca at all?
I work mostly with wool, but I have spun with alpaca. It has quite different characteristics in the end form, so I don't always choose it. And especially with dog fur, alpaca tends to be hot in this fiber form, so the wool helps cut that down. But alpaca is a great fiber for spinning. It's really soft. It's softer than most wools. But again, that's a generalization.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I certainly learned
Hashtag,
more
I hear a
about.
hashtag.
Yeah.
Not all alpacas.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes, they are not all equal. They are individual.
My husband
Um,
has an alpaca shawl
mm,
that is amazingly soft. It is
yes.
ridiculous. Oh my gosh.
And ultra
I
lightweight, I'm sure.
Wow, I love that thing. So when you say something runs hot, excuse me, do you mean that when I wear it, it holds too much heat and it's very, very insulating? And so it could be such a warm material that I would be uncomfortable. Is that what you mean?
I mean, you would be uncomfortable in the summer, definitely. Yeah,
Okay,
it just
got it.
doesn't have as much air. Wool allows you to trap more air, so it breathes much better. But something like alpaca, it insulates very, very well. It traps all that body heat, and there's not as much breathability. So yeah,
Okay.
you'll sweat, and well, there's some wicking properties, but for the most part, you'll retain your body heat higher
Right.
with alpaca and dog fur.
So when I'm
Hmm.
hiking in, the northern latitudes in the winter, then yes, I'll take it.
Exactly. Yes, you want to go for the really insulating fibers.
Yes.
Yes. The thing about alpacas, I recently did a lot of research on this just on the side because I love them. They are like one of nature's most gentle animals. They are like sustainable all on their own. They don't, they eat grass, but they chew it. They don't like pull it out, so they just are like clipping it, and they have very gentle feet when they run, so they don't crush everything. So they're great for their environment. Yeah, they're really, really a great animal in general. So it's a nice fiber to use, I think, since the animal is kind of a more sustainable, a little bit more ethical, I think. So just
And
things to consider.
I also love the magical correspondences that you found, Katie, around like the, just that spirit of action, adaptability, balance,
Mm-hmm.
community diligence,
Stamina.
right?
Yep.
Yeah,
A
there's
lot of
some
what the
really,
fiber encompasses itself, of
and
course,
what the
right?
animal, how the animal acts and what the animal does, right?
Yep.
So if I wanted to blend something with alpaca, I think we could consider that fiber as something that would bring the energy
Mm.
of, balance, diligence, adaptability, but also a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of that kick your back legs and get going action, like a little
Exactly.
alpaca might have.
Yep. They like to run around and enjoy the breeze on their face.
They're the cutest. Oh my
They are so
gosh.
cute. I know. Even
Oh
though
my
they're
gosh.
supposed to, aren't they the ones that spit, or is that llamas?
Are
They
they
both
related?
do.
Oh,
But
good.
yeah, because I've been spit on by an alpaca.
Oh, so lucky.
So we have evidence, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it was an unhappy alpaca. I was volunteering at a vet clinic, and the owner had decided to try to shear it by themselves with no experience, and they
Oh.
accidentally nicked its chest wide open.
Oh.
So the vet had to staple it up, and then they had me follow the poor baby around the office because the owner was gone and we didn't have a cage big enough to contain it. So it was wandering around our office just dripping. And so they're like, just follow him and try to clean him up. And as soon as I tried to wrap my arm around its long, because they have long neck, and try to hold its face out of the way so I could clean it up a bit, and it was not having it. It quickly unswiveled and spit right in my face.
Oh,
Oh my
jeez.
God.
Right in your face.
Right in my face. Yeah. So yeah, they spit.
Well, so they're real cute and kind till they're not, is what you're saying. That's
Well,
cute.
it was injured.
I
Poor thing
get
was
it.
injured.
I mean, people are the same. I don't blame
So
it.
funny. Well, we should talk about the magical associations of wool. I mean, we've talked a lot about wool, right? Mostly
Mm-hmm.
from sheep. I think wool can come is sort of a generic term that I think can mean the coat of many different animals, right? We talk about like this kind of wool or that kind of wool,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, certainly British terminology. I'm going to go to the wool shop. That is a generalized yarn term over there. So yes, you're correct.
Like a Hoover is a vacuum.
Exactly. Yep. A
Yeah.
Kleenex is a tissue or whatever. Yeah.
But I think when we think of sheep, I love the research that, again, we found, which is this idea of, the sheep really connected with springtime, right?
Mm.
So a lot of the ideas of spring come from ewe's milk and, this whole idea of like, the mid January festival of Imbolc or Candlemas, and also the following one of the spring equinox, was a lot around like use first milk, and this sort of idea of dairy arts is very much incorporated with springtime. And that brings this idea of rebirth and regeneration, and like,
Yes, baby
and life
season.
continues. Yeah, the sheep is gonna give birth to little sheep, which they're not called kids, are they? I forget. Anyway, to
Lambs?
be the
I don't know.
lambs. Oh yeah, of course they're called lambs.
I
I'm
don't
so
know.
dumb. So, the little lambs, right? So you have this whole idea there. And what you found, Katie, about, of course, the ram,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I mean, Aries obviously is the ram sign in the
Which is
zodiac.
the first sign of the zodiac, which happens in spring. So
So,
that is a really cool thing. So anytime, I mean, it's the most common fiber, but I think as people are knitting with wool,
hmm
bringing the ideas, the imagination as you're knitting of, wow, I'm knitting with wool. This wool comes from a sheep. This is the symbolism of sheep. How is that symbolism of rebirth, fertility, growth, the springtime type of springing into things? How am I incorporating that into this piece? And
hmm
that's a great sort of knitting meditation, as most people are going to be knitting with wool or a wool blend of some kind, right?
Absolutely. And the thing about wool, and Amanda, I think you'll agree here, is that, people think it's only for winter, but it actually is great for summer too, because, yeah, I mean, you don't want to like a huge, thick wool sweater, perhaps, but like socks made out of wool are really great because they are naturally wicking as a fiber. Wool hates to absorb water. So it's also naturally flame retardant. It will put itself out, which is also why it's great for kids. So it's actually more breathable than a lot of people get it credit for, and it is naturally stink resistant, so it does not absorb odor like a synthetic will. So it is a magical fiber, whether it knows it or not.
Yeah.
Just
You
from
know
that.
that whenever you go to an outdoor store, whenever you go to an outdoor retailer, you
Mm-hmm.
see that a lot of the hiking gear is, if it's not polyester, which
Yes.
I'm not a fan of plastic fibers, if you want a natural fiber for outdoor use and for hiking and all the things, there are wool short sleeve, like Hawaiian shirts made of a really beautiful wool woven fabric, right? I
Absolutely.
own several of them. Undergarments you can find, close to the skin, base layers that are
Yep.
wool and super soft, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important for, and I think most people might know this, but it's good to be reminded that wool can be woven or spun in very fine,
Mm-hmm.
threads that can be used, and just like anything else. My partner, Michael, he's an avid hiker. He's done portions of the Pacific Crest Trail and other things, and
Wow.
he says, and what a lot of hikers, I believe, say is cotton kills, because
Yes.
if you have cotton, you're going to get sopping wet and potentially be at risk for hypothermia, whereas wool has far less of that risk.
Yes, and cotton absorbs water, and which is great if you want to make like a towel or a dishcloth or a summer garment that you're using just to like breeze about in. But if you're doing anything that has agitation, like if you're hiking in jeans and a cotton t-shirt and you are sweating through them, you're gonna have blisters any place where your body's moving against all of that wet fabric. You're gonna have a bad time. So,
Well, it's why you don't see cotton swimwear, right?
there
Or
you
the people
go.
that wear the t-shirts in the pool and they just like
Yeah, they're just
absolutely.
clung. Yes. That's actually, swimsuits were initially made with wool, which sounds horrible because I can't imagine what the wool quality back then was like. It's much better now, but yeah, there you go, because it was not absorbent. So,
A
yeah.
modern wool in a swimsuit would be awesome, though.
Oh,
You
I'm
know.
sure there's knit and crochet versions out there.
Oh, I'm sure.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I'm thinking of woven fabrics, but for sure.
That would probably be more secure. Yes.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about cotton, because that's one of the plants that produces a fiber, right?
Mm-hmm.
And cotton has a lot of mystery around it. People hear words like Egyptian cotton, and they hear Pima cotton, right?
Mm.
And we have a long history in this country of oppression around the cash crop of cotton and the slave trade.
Mm.
Cotton comes from subtropical locations around the world. It's not necessarily native to. It's one of those plants that is really everywhere. In the United States, there was. We think of the South being a big cotton producing area, but actually, Arizona is the largest producer of cotton in the United States, and that's Pima County, and the Pima Indians are that is where the word Pima comes from, which is a cotton with a slightly longer length, fiber. And then Egyptian cotton, which most things labeled Egyptian cotton, we've discovered are not really Egyptian cotton when they do DNA testing on it.
Scandalo.
A scandalo. But when you can get good Egyptian cotton, it's grown in the Nile River Valley, and it's really long fibers and really soft. And so you get these amazing things from cotton. So that's just a little bit of what I've researched. Do you have more? I mean, we just talked about how cotton is absorbing water. Isn't it a little less elastic than animal fiber, like than wool?
Yeah,
Right?
especially when it's wet. If it gets wet and you pull it, it will stretch out, which is probably why if you've ever worn the same t-shirt like twice, or you've realized your jeans are a wash and wear type thing because every time you wear them the waistband stretches out over the course of the day, that's a very cotton quality. Now, I don't personally have a lot of spinning experience, but I did used to work with a woman who grew her own cotton and spun it, and she said it was extremely difficult because it was really short. I don't know if you have any experience with that, but I have to imagine it's going to be difficult, more like the animal fur.
Yeah, the shorter staple lengths like that, because cotton can be just a couple inches long, unless you're talking about like that Piman Egyptian that's a little bit longer. It can be difficult to you draft fiber when you spin it, so you pull it apart, but your fingers are already so big that yeah,
Ah.
so you have to do a very specific spinning method where the twist enters into your fiber supply, and you're not drafting it, you're letting the twist that enters the supply do the pulling for you. And so it's called long draw
Ooh.
when you spin like that. And the only way I've ever been able to successfully spin cotton is with a supported spindle, and you have to spin that way on supported spindles. As far as I know, there may be some exceptions to this, but yeah, it was very difficult. It likes to spin very fine, and considering how long it takes to hand spin something, it's just something that you don't typically see a lot of, because it's several hours to just spin one fine thread. And if you're not looking for something that's lace weight and you want something plied for durability,
Ooh.
it's really a commitment. But again, if that's what you're into and you're focusing on that and that's what your intention is for, or maybe you
Yeah.
just need a little bit. I mean, I can imagine, especially if you grew it yourself, it's a lot more meaningful because you took
Sure.
that time to care for that plant, and you
Oof.
did the from scratch process.
It's a labor of love.
It
Well,
is.
if you had cotton, couldn't you also do other things with it, like perhaps felt it, or I don't know if cotton will felt, but that would be
I don't know.
I don't
yeah.
think it will felt maybe traditionally like a wool would, but I know you could like press it into like paper and things like that. So, maybe not felted per se, but I think it could be purposed in a similar fashion into something kind of close.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
certainly the dried plant, very prickly, with the cotton ball in those like dried, sort of almost like a poppy
mm,
type of shell, is very beautiful. I mean, it's a really distinctive plant. There's a lot of history behind the cotton plant.
mhm.
So using either the plant by itself or cotton fiber, or that's already woven or something like that, if you have your own cotton and decide to do something with it and experiment, you know, a lot of cotton is grown again in very dry and hot climates.
Mm.
And so it makes sense that cotton is associated with bringing rain and, those types of things. So it's fascinating that cotton absorbs water and it has sort of a relationship with water. So when I think about
Yeah.
it magically, I can think about like, oh, this is something that brings healing, protection, luck, wealth, prosperity, and that it is rainmaking. And so if you think about prosperity being connected to rain and sort of this idea that we have, like, make it rain,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Meaning let the dollars fall, right?
Yeah. Let the
Hopefully
crops
they're
grow. Yeah.
hopefully they're 20s or hundreds and not just singles, but whatever. But that is,
I'll
but
take
that's
any flying
something.
money. I'm just putting that out there.
Any flying money is fine. So I think that that's a cool thing. And you did some research and found that cotton is connected with the feminine or the moon.
Yeah, and I was like, I wonder why. But then I was thinking about it like in again a more updated literal sense, and I thought, well, the moon and women, it's like, is it sort of like a period cycle? Is it a menstrual thing? We are connected
Hmm.
with that sort of thing. We are very earthbound because of that. I mean, things we use for menstrual, hygiene quite often are made of cotton, for absorbency and how clean it can be. So yeah, I mean, I really do believe it has a connection, and a modern connection at that.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I think it's important to look at how the plant grows in a cycle of the seasons, right?
Mm,
And it's absorbent. And it is a very, very common fabric. We're
mm,
all probably wearing cotton. I am
yeah.
today, right? And it's a very comfortable and cool fabric to wear. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just it's also nice that it's usually fairly inexpensive. And as a knitter who used to work or live and work in Florida, I really appreciate now the expanse of fibers we have available for us, because, back in the day, acrylic or not great quality wool was all that was available. So I can't imagine living in Florida and just like knitting with wool and acrylic all the time. It would be like very limiting, I think. And now we have things not only like cotton, but like also linen is a great fiber, one that I enjoy working with. Although can be talk about not having an elastic hand. This does not have an elastic hand, and it also is typically quite rough on the hand. But the finished products are so good, so good.
Amanda, have you ever spun linen?
I have not. That is the fiber I haven't tried yet. Yeah, I have not spun flax. It's a little intimidating.
Yeah, it looks very rustic in its like natural state too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're very the flax fiber. The research I did has flax fibers that are like 3 times as strong as cotton,
Mm.
and they're smooth and straight, a little bit longer, and they can lay really beautifully. The flax as a like, we think of someone with flaxen hair
Mm.
being a blonde-haired person because the fibers are often a light yellow in color. Sort of the
Mm.
natural color is that blonde sort of color. And there's a lot of magical correspondences with the plant, with flax.
Mm.
Righteousness, purity, elegance, luxury, but also psychic powers. So a lot of the stuff around beauty and like it, because it doesn't cause sweat because it breathes. It's
Mm.
also a plant that grows outside of the subtropical dry hot areas. And so it's one of the first plant fibers that was used in the steppes of Russia and in the sort of Slovak area for
Mm.
spinning and for making fabric. So there's evidence of people wearing linen way back when it was available. So I think that that's a very cool thing, that it has a very long history, that people
Yeah.
figured out, how to.
Ancient fiber.
And
Yeah.
we have the fairy tale, right, of Sleeping Beauty, right? She was, or was it Sleeping Beauty, or was it Rumpelstiltskin? It was someone where I think
Yeah.
Sleeping Beauty was told to spin the flax, spin the flax.
Mm-hmm.
And she pricked her finger on a part of the spinning wheel,
Yep.
which everyone is like, what part of the spinning wheel would that be? Um, but earlier versions of that, before the spinning wheel was invented, she pricked her finger on the woody stem of the flax, which separates from the
Oh,
fiber as you process it, right?
there you
And so
go.
her finger was pricked by the woody stem. And there were the earlier versions where children had to suck her finger to get the fiber out or something strange like that.
Oh.
And she fell into a slumber, you know, until she
Ooh,
was awoken.
I love a good weird fairy tale.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm sure that inspired a lot of kids to get into spinning back in the day, so that's good. No
When
wonder.
you say hand spinning, Amanda, do you mean with a drop spindle or do you mean, is there another way to do it? Are you
Yeah,
rubbing fiber against a table?
I
I
guess
don't
you,
know.
I mean, you don't want to rub it against the table because you could
Are you
maybe
doing it
felt it.
between your hands?
No, I just mean using some kind of tool with your hand. So yeah, it could be a drop spindle, it could be a spinning wheel, whether it's a more traditional style or even an electric spinning wheel. You can make makeshift spindles. I've seen people spin yarn with pencils.
There
So
you go.
yeah, you can any sort of tool to help you get twist in that fiber faster, but you're doing all the drafting by hand versus a machine that's going to do all that for you super quickly.
I
Hmm.
see. I see.
It's like even machine knitters are technically knitting by hand because they are the ones still having to pass the, little shuttly thing back and forth to actually make the stitches happen. So, nuances, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
Should
So
we talk about two more fiber types?
I think so. So these
Let's do
are
it.
some good ones to touch base on. So first, I think we should touch base real quick on silk. Silk is a very interesting fiber. I have mixed feelings on it personally. The fiber itself is awesome. It's, super strong, it's shiny, it's lightweight, it's durable, it's expensive, but the way it is harvested is not always so appealing.
Yeah.
So how it's done is the silkworm, which actually makes the cocoon in silk, is then all the cocoons are taken and boiled. So the worm inside unfortunately doesn't make it, and they do this on purpose so that the worm cannot break through the fibers because they want to take it all off on one long fiber. So,
So the production of silk requires um,
mhm,
the boiling alive, a creature. And so
yeah,
that is definitely something to think about is how does that work with your ethics? Definitely not
yeah.
vegan or vegetarian in that for that manner.
Yeah, it comes with a little debt. So,
Right.
so take that with what you will, but the fabric it offers is again like a really magical fiber. People use it for all sorts of skincare regimens. It's luxury. It's insulating. It's one of the warmest fibers on the planet because it's from this animal, and they can be made so thin. It's really a magical fiber. I'm guessing you probably have not spun with silk, but perhaps you have.
I have.
Ooh,
Yeah, I
what
have.
was that like?
It's really nice. It's unusual compared to other fibers because like you mentioned, they unfortunately boil the animals in there so that you get these long lengths of fiber. So instead of your hands drafting a couple inches apart, you can be feet
Mm.
apart pulling these fibers, which is what part of what makes the silk so durable. I spun 100% silk hankies, they call them, and they're like
Mm.
stacked layers of silk, and you pull off a little sheet and draft it out. And then I've also spun blends with silk in them, which are a little easier to blend. There's not as much silk content,
Mm.
but you do have to stay mindful. The most difficult one was an alpaca silk blend because the silk is such long staple and the alpaca is much
Oh.
shorter. I would find myself, once that twist gets into your fiber, it starts pulling. So it
Mm.
would pull the silk from way back here, and then I'd have this tiny little bit of alpaca just like bunching up while the silk was trying to pull, and it was grabbing the alpaca from the back. It just was not a pleasant experience, and it was definitely a learning experience. But yeah, silk, it has amazing properties despite the way it's harvested, and
Mm.
it it can lend great properties to the final product, but at a cost.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well,
Right.
with that, let's have a quick break as I go grab my dog, who you can probably hear in the background, and we'll be right back.
Pardon the interruption, but here's a special message from, well, us. Hey, Magical Makers. Are you looking for a fun summertime project? Try my No Sweat Mason Cozies, now available in 2 different sizes. You can save 50% on this pattern through July 31st by using the code KNITASPELL, that's all one word, on Ravelry at checkout. These beverage covers not only keep your hands dry, they're also a fun way to identify whose drink belongs to who. Cheers! Hey, Jim, let's talk about a palm reading for a sec.
Oh yeah, my favorite topic.
So I don't think a lot of people necessarily think of getting a palm reading, but my palm reading with you was awesome, and it actually helped with a lot of preconceived notions that I had of the craft before now.
Oh, you had preconceived notions about palmistry? What were they?
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, I'm pretty literal, so I thought having a short lifeline might mean you have a short life, or that a
Right.
star on your palm is bad.
Oh, that's interesting. Both of those are common. You know, a short lifeline does not mean a short life. It actually means a life of connection with the divine and learning and creating type of life. And a star in your palm is a sign of spiritual gift. Those are two things that are dispelled right away. I know there's a lot of things on the palm that people
Yeah.
think are good or bad, right? There's nothing inherently negative in your palm. You can use all the tools, all the markings. They are associated with your strengths, your personality, and things you can use in your life.
Absolutely. I really love that modern take on palmistry, and it actually really resonated in my reading. I think everyone would enjoy a reading from you. And, dear listener, if you too would like a fantastic experience that offers insight, direction, and clarity, I highly suggest booking a session with my dear friend, James Devine, and you can find more information at thedivinedhand.com.
Thanks for listening. Let's jump back into our episode.
And we're back. And I brought a special guest with me. If anybody is watching the YouTube channel to see our video, my little dog Pancakes came to visit. She hates
Not
being not
not
included.
not one pancake,
That's right, the
but a
whole
stack of
Yes.
pancakes.
Yes, exactly. So, anyway, so we were talking about silk.
And the magical connections of silk,
Mm-hmm.
again, wealth, luxury, right?
Mm-hmm.
Prestige. There's also this idea of transformation because it's a cocoon of
Mm-hmm.
a caterpillar that becomes a silk moth. So we have a lot of this amazing, as you're working with silk, you can bring, those ideas in. And there is silk that I think is made after that is made after the silkworm breaks out, and it's thought of as a lower quality silk. Is that true?
Yeah, so raw silk or silk noils also are sometimes like when the animal is actually let to break through and live and all of that. It breaks the fibers, but they'll just use them as shorter fibers. So it's not quite as smooth or shiny of a fabric because of that, just because that's how the light catches it. But it's a more ethical silk, I would say, and it's probably less expensive as well.
Yeah,
So yeah.
great. Okay, so that's an alternative to bring the magical intention in and
Mm-hmm.
still have something that might be,
Yep.
less stomach turning.
Right. Yeah. Get the
Hmm.
benefits of the fiber without the
Yeah,
less desirable elements. Indeed.
right.
Yeah. So.
Well, talking about less desirable yarns, although they're very affordable,
Yes.
plastic.
Yes.
We are
Yeah.
finding that plastic is a problem in our planet, that it's floating in the oceans, that there are microplastics that are truly microscopic. There was just an article about them being part of the dust that is blowing around the planet is now
Hmm.
super microfibers from microfiber fabrics. And also in your wash, as you wash those
Mm.
super plushy baby blankets that are made of polyester and acrylic, those teeny little microfibers are going down the drain and into the water and into the oceans. That, along with the larger plastics that break down and break down and break down into plastic pellets everywhere, we're definitely polluting ourselves with this unearthed petroleum product. That's my little sermon on plastic.
Yeah.
But isn't plastic and polyester and nylon and acrylic yarns like the most common that are sold in big box stores?
They are popular fibers. A lot to do because they are affordable and they're easy to care for. And again, ease, something that's easy isn't always the best choice. It's just like treating wool yarns with superwash. Superwash is a chemical treatment process that applies glue to the fibers on the wool so that the scales are like stuck in and they won't felt against each other when they're washed. But essentially, it is a chemical treatment process on your natural, wool. It'll wash off eventually. It is there. So it's a reality of a choice that we make. Whether it's the best choice or not, I guess, is up to the person. But I think a lot of people don't even realize how it's made, what the impact is to even consider, is it the best option for them? Yeah.
Well, and we all have those heirloom Afghans that grandma knitted that are on the back of the couch, and we'll keep them forever. And we also find them at, Goodwill a lot.
Yes.
But they're not always the most comfortable. Like that feeling of that 70s acrylic.
Yeah, it's I call it
yarn.
squeaky. It's like a squeaky kind of feel, and that also is usually quite pilly. Even though I think that technology has come forward a lot in terms of making a better synthetic fiber, in terms of what works better. Again, just the process that has to be done to make it into an existence. It's another one where you may not be paying a lot for that yarn, but is there a lot of debt attached to that yarn?
Yeah, there's environmental debt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, good thing we have recycled acrylic yarns, right?
Yes.
And go. Amanda, do you know the myth of recycled acrylic yarns?
I do not. This is the first I'm hearing of it, so I'm interested.
So it's not really a myth, perhaps. It's more of a misunderstanding that all fibers that are recycled are good for the environment, and things like that. And to a degree, yes, you can be making something that was, a plastic product into a yarn. However, you still have to process that item to make it into the yarn. So it's not like it is a zero impact product. In a lot of cases, it's actually more of a harm to have to make it into this new product because of the process that it has to be liquidated and then re-extruded and spun and all of that. So it's causing a bigger footprint in the end than it's saving. So And that's something that's really hard to track in your yarn. How do you find out where it's coming from? And even like the manufacturers have to trust what their suppliers are telling them. I worked in this industry. I had a lot of conversations with people about where things were coming from, because people are wanting to know more, and they should want to know where it's coming from. So
supply chain tracking on that is so hard.
Yeah.
Here's something, though, that it would be, I think, the most ethical is going to Goodwill or other sort of secondhand shops, buying acrylic sweaters and making them into, like, taking the knit already done acrylic sweaters and making them into, I've seen people make really amazing magical garments out of piece work that is then sewn together, all different color work that is done. these designs of cloaks or long coats or shawls or things like that. I've seen some amazing work, and that isn't recycling, that's reusing. And in that
Yes.
sense, I think that there's a way to keep the plastic sort of are going to last for a very long time, right? And if I'm going to use acrylic sweaters to make a magical garment, the magical correspondence of that would be like modernism, futurism. I think it brings some of that ideas around, you know, mastery and power, sort of those types of energies to it. So I think you can use these acrylics in a magical way. Certainly, especially if you think about a form of reuse as opposed to buying new, skeins or shanks of yarn that are, new to the market, either whether they are recycled Coke bottles or recycled plastic bottles, or whether it's raw,
Right.
new material. In any case, I think it's worth considering the ethics of where our fibers come from in all
Absolutely.
of these cases, right? So how do we even know? And you started to touch on this, working at a yarn shop, working at a maker shop, both of you, and having this experience. How do I, as a consumer, best figure out how to have an ethical fiber? You have thoughts about that, Amanda?
I mean, it really comes down to doing the research, because I find more often than not, like Katie mentioned earlier, it's hard to get that information from the supplier, which then the production company is trying to share what they then know, especially when these fibers are imported. It crosses those areas of international questioning. And so, I mean, you have to do the research. I highly recommend doing a little bit of Google research yourself on actually watching the process of these synthetic or even biosynthetic fibers being made. That was kind of the first eye-opening experience for me, is watching how bamboo actually becomes a spinnable fiber. Was like, I had no idea. I thought bamboo was kind of like how flax becomes linen, and it's absolutely not. It's very much along the lines of how resin-based polymers become acrylic yarn.
Yes.
So I highly recommend looking that up and watching those videos.
There you go.
Right. So
Knowledge is power.
Yes.
some natural or vegan yarns are viscose or they're rayon or something like that, but those are, I think of them as wood pulp or some sort of wood fiber. But when I do research, I realize, oh my gosh, the plastic, the petroleum based processing that has to happen, and the carbon footprint of those fibers are almost as bad as, if not as bad as, acrylic.
Yeah. Yep.
Fascinating.
Exactly. And again, not that it's unavoidable for everything, but at least knowing the choices that you're making is impactful. So
Yeah, and if you can make a choice that's just one step closer to ideal, you don't have to go all the way there. But if you can start to if we can start to consider it and make one choice that's a little better, even if it's going from pure acrylic to a blend. Maybe it's just saying, okay, well, at least I'm just going to use wool or something, or I'm going to learn, that can be a step in the right direction, right? And that's, I think, all that we could consider. Is we're also saying, if you can knit with a little, knit, crochet, make, weave, make with a little bit of intent, a little bit of magical intent, that's also a really cool thing to try and to incorporate, right?
Yep.
And when we talk about spinning your dog or cat's fur into yarn, I mean, that is so magical. Do you ever feel, Amanda, do you ever have like a magical experience or a connection as you're spinning? It must be very meditative. Do you ever have a magical experience or metaphysical experience while doing that?
I think, yeah, spinning in general, it for me definitely is a very meditative process. It's this slow, repetitive movement that your body gets used to, which kind of frees up your mind. And so spinning in general, I love for that reason. And I think it can be very magical for that reason alone. But then throwing in something like those animal fibers, even if it wasn't my pet, just knowing back to the knowledge is power, knowing where it came from, knowing what it's for and how much it means to the person I'm making it for, it is why I'm able to do it. Like I said, some of this fur isn't clean and there's some unpleasant processes to it, but it's the end result. It's what you're providing for someone, and there's nothing more special than that.
Oh, that is so wonderful. All right, well, if you would like to get on Amanda's waiting list, you can find out more about her offerings at mandobugcrafts.com, and you can find more about her woolly fur there. Oh, Amanda, this has been so wonderful. Thank you for being our first guest.
Yeah, this has been great. I really appreciated it. Thank you guys so much.
Yes.
So fantastic to meet you. I just love it. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think I learned a lot. I don't know about you, Jim.
Oh, I feel like I can go and spin now. I'm ready.
Do it.
All I have is the comb that I comb my hair with, but I'm ready.
That's step one.
I'm ready to ask Amanda to spin for me. I think that's a little more, but I'll have to be on the waiting list.
Start collecting.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
let's just make sure Mandobug, Mando, and then bug, like BUG, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mandobug, yeah. Well, we'll put links in the description. And thank you everyone for listening. I hope you've loved this episode as much as we've loved being here and talking.
Yes, we'll see you next week, everybody.
So long.
Bye.
This episode is a wrap. If you enjoyed what you heard, go ahead and follow us on your favorite podcast streaming app. And don't forget, you can see full video episodes of Knit a Spell on Light from Lantern's YouTube channel.